Hello and welcome to the Free Outside Show. This is a topic I've wanted to hit on for a while, so let's dive right into it. Please like, subscribe, all those things. Today I want to talk about runners versus influencers in trail running and how they all work together and where I think it's headed, because I think it's very interesting. Because on the surface, it might look like, well, why do influencers get money? The pros are objectively better at the sport because they're paid just to run. But in actuality, I think the influencers can drive a lot of new athletes and people to the sport and also direct them to their purchasers. Their purchases. So if we just take influencers as a whole, what they do well is they show like the aspirational side of like getting into the sport. They really are great at storytelling. Maybe the results aren't the same as the pro runners. I mean, they actually aren't if we're going by the definition. So let's start by getting into definitions. So pro runners, we're going to call them athletes signed to performance-based contracts. Results matter. They might coach, speak, write, but doing well and performing or achieving things like FKTs or first or things that are athletically driven, that is the reason they've signed with brands. And now let's call influencers people with followings, usually large followings, who create content. They may engage with their audiences, speak, and they're usually a notable figure at races. They might be the people that others go up to and want pictures with and things like that. So that's how we're going to separate them. Influencers, most their income is through the content that they create, and the brand deals go along with that content. Pro runners, their monetary gain, their income from those contracts in the trail running space is going to be largely from results and being at the top of the field. So what I think is interesting is for someone to be a pro these days, it probably takes 20 hours of work a week. I mean, maybe not quite that much, but I don't mean 20 hours of running. It might only be 8 to 10 hours of running, 8 to 12 hours of running. But then you have strength work on top of that. So that's add in 2 hours. And then any more, you probably have different dietary things. So maybe even more cooking time, shopping. You have obligations to brands. Maybe it's gear work. And then you also have things like heat training. That's a big buzzword these days. And then there's often a commute to all these things. And then you throw in races, the commute to those. It's probably reaching around 20 hours a week of commitment. And then on top of that, you have often media obligations for pro runners, either around events or leading up to them, just things like podcasts, things like that. And I think it's hard, especially if they're not earning a near full-time salary, to expect more work out of an athlete who is already working 20 hours a week to go above and beyond and cross over into that influencer category. And where that's tough is if they don't put out that content that's relatable and converts potential customers or showcases what they're wearing and things like that, then it's going to be really hard for brands to see that direct value. But what pro athletes do offer the brands is they validate the product. So if it's like a shoe, so let's just take the Adidas Speed Ultra that really came to fame with David Roche wearing this in Leadville and Javelina and winning both. So I think that validates it. If we just take David as an athlete, I know he's more of an influencer, actually, I would say, just between his podcast and YouTube series nowadays. He's a great athlete too, but I think his podcast was big before he was a bigger athlete. But the results and winning those races validated that product. So that helped sell a lot of product. He also talked about that on the podcast, on his podcast as well. So I think it's hard to directly gain what came from that. But another thing is On just announced and released their new super shoe. And a lot of their athletes have done pretty well. I believe Katie Scheid just switched to On, and even her switching sponsors, I think she signed for like $250,000. Hot take. We get so much info over here at Free Outside Headquarters. That really validates the brand and the product as well. And that'll drive people to purchase it, because if you're like, well, if these top tier athletes believe in it and they know what is good, then it's going to be good for me and my ultra. And so if we switch over to the influencer side, this is where it's a little tricky because let's say a number of brands that have launched campaigns recently are Norda, Mount to Coast, Speedland's done it in the past, all kinds of brands, but they'll send products to influencers. Maybe the influencer has not signed with the brand, but they'll review the product. And often the reviews are largely positive. They're not always perfect because an influencer is probably more focused on creating that content, converting, and making those brand deals happier in the same vein that the athlete is, but the athlete has the power to switch brands. The influencer may work with 10 different brands and review the products and say the pros and cons, but the cons are probably very much limited because they're trying to get paid from that sponsorship and make that money. But at the same time, their audience is one ready to convert because they're often just getting into running. They're really motivated by these influencers. They take what they say and apply it. And often the influencers have a bigger audience, so they have a bigger reach. And so that's kind of the double-edged sword of pro runners versus influencers. But I think there is this magical middle ground. And you may think, well, Jeff, don't you have sponsors? Don't you have a podcast? Yeah, I'm trying to live in that middle ground. Because what I think is going to be the most beneficial is for people with the ability to focus and create their own brands where they can work with companies, but also have their own voice alongside of it. So let's say Brooks, for example, the shoe company, they have probably 20 models of trail runners. Now, the athlete that signs with them doesn't have to like all of them because you can only wear one pair of shoes at a time, or I guess two if you wear one on each foot. But they can really gravitate towards one shoe. They can speak about what they like about the shoe, why they use that shoe. And that can be through their own platform and offer a lot more honesty compared to just saying they sign with Brooks because they make the best products on the market, which would not be true because every product on the market is not going to be the best because they have some that are definitely at lower price points. And then they have super shoes, everything in between. And just different products work for different people. So it would be disingenuous to just say you signed with a brand because you love everything they make. So when I say athletes should really focus on building their own brand, really what this means is through honesty. And we've seen a lot of this on Substack. That's a good platform. I just think the ceiling on what you can do at Substack is still fairly low as compared to YouTube. I think the longer form content where you can see someone, you can hear what they're saying, and they can show you what they like about a shoe, how they like to run downhills, things like this, where there's this emotional connection where it's both teaching, it's showing, and even learning, like offering up a mistake they made during a race and talking about it. And podcasts are a great platform as well. But I think this is the middle ground that's going to grow the most. And how I think it should grow is this acceptance by pro runners that influencers are part of the sport and they're actually adding a lot to it. Influencers have figured out how to reach people. They've figured out what works. They know how to interact with their audience. Often they have a bubbly personality, which works really good, and they inspire people. I think pro runners do this by their actions, but they also can with their words and their messaging and what they put out. And it doesn't have to be every medium, every runner, every way. But I do think that there's something to be learned from being able to put something out there that is content of like behind the scenes, even if it was Jim Walmsley saying, this is what I have on race day, and it's 2 weeks before race day, my A race, and I'm going to show you what I eat to get ready for my long run because I want to practice everything so that I'm ready to go. These would be like great insights where people could take away things that are the strategies that the pros actually use versus influencers who are like, I take athletic greens and then I take my protein shake and then I take this thorn supplement or something. That feels disingenuous. And I think there's a lot more, honesty that can come from a pro runner who is going to be less tied to multiple brand deals and be able to show what they actually do, what works, and especially things like workouts, race scheduling, things like that, the look behind the curtain that I've tried to do in some interviews on the podcast, but it's always hard because, it's such a secretive world still. I don't think we know what most athletes make, and it's a lot less than we really think. And the ability to put together these content things is not going to be natural. So this is where I think the fault lies on the brand in both of these cases. I think there needs to be two things. One thing that I think could be really big is more things like athlete summits where John G, who I work with, episode sponsored by John G, but what they do is a couple times a year, we all go out to a race, they get a house and we interact. Some people on the team run more, some people run less, some people are more competitive, some are less, but everyone interacts and they all have different niches and places within the brand. And I think that interaction is really important. If you take someone like Hoka, they have a team of ambassadors and then they also have athletes. Solomon has the same thing where you're in a different bucket, but you don't often interact. And I think there's so much growth to be had here. And I kind of thought about this too, as I saw Jeff Pelletier was out at the craft camp, I believe, and he was filming some stuff and running alongside the athletes there because Jeff is both an athlete and an influencer and a podcaster and a YouTuber. But I think that really shows that there's some integration that can go where he can help showcase those athletes' personalities and the product in the same way because he has an eye for that stuff. He's been doing it for his whole life. So there's something to be gained there. And then on top of these camps or the interactions where you're putting the pros and influencers together and creating content just because an influencer has the direction and what works and the pros have the skill and the knowledge to share with the influencers, there could be so many golden moments of people teaching people different things about how to do things. And they could all come away with assets to use in the months and years to come. But the other thing that I think needs to really happen is brands think about what the value is. Is the value of the 9th place male at Western States to be wearing your shoes? Or is the value telling the story of that 9th place male getting 9th place, whether it's short training vlogs or just a couple days worth of content surrounding Western States, showcasing that, how they got there, what they do, why they do it. And that's going to be through a videographer. So I think maybe it's different kinds of contracts where you're building an audience or a brand with that athlete through their own channel. And that can be as much of an incentive as a strict monetary amount, because I think at that point, then it's mutually beneficial where you're building this in a really organic way of, I don't really want to use an athlete's example. I'll use myself. So let's say, what's Timberland boots. I'm trying to think of something that won't be too relatable or anything as I'm talking to brands all the time and stuff and don't want to throw anyone under the bus. So let's say Timberland boots is like, Jeff, you're going for the Brooks Range Traverse up in Alaska. We want to contribute 20 grand to the project, 10 grand for you and 10 grand for content, like a 4-part video series or something like that. We will help you get a videographer and storyline, and this will live on your YouTube. And some of the stipulations are like some product showcasing or putting in, I don't know, that it's sponsored by Timberland, and then we get to use the reels on our channel. Some sort of thing like that. Or it could be an annual thing, like 2 years with a 30 grand, so 15 grand a year allowance for videography projects, and we'll discuss them once a quarter or something like that, where I think it will build content, because what we're seeing is a lot of bootstrap content, especially looking at single track and the coverage of the Barkley marathons, and especially Jasmine Paris finishing them. It's an incredible project, but it was largely bootstrapped for the most part and put together after the fact, that I think there's so much market. Even if an athlete doesn't finish Western States, if you started that video on them, I think what Heather Jackson's doing on her channel is really good, and surprising that it doesn't seem like there's more support from her sponsors to put together and have more, I guess, shooters on the project and editing and stuff. But I think it's putting so much on the athletes now to do it themselves. I think Tara Dower even hires her own videographer for her races, that this is a major spot that brands are missing out on and should be a part of contracts. I don't think it should make the contract value less, because I think it's adding value to both the brand and the athlete. So say an average athlete gets, well, actually, this is going to be way higher than the average salary, just knowing behind the curtain. Let's say an athlete makes 60 grand a year and they've been making that for the last 2 years. And then they're negotiating again. I think the value of that contract should stay at 60 grand, but then add in some amount of a content like bonus, not even a bonus, like an allowance to work with videographers and tell that story and to build up that athlete's profile. And I think that that's where that back and forth goes, and you're educating the athlete on how to promote themselves and put themselves out there. I think this is especially important with people like a Hans Troyer who's young, or a Jeff McGavro who is an incredible runner, but just less people know about him, or an Adam Peterman who's a great runner, but doesn't seem especially always interested in doing his own content. I think there's so much value in brands investing in this, and it should really be a concrete part of projects. And how I think about it, because you might be thinking, well, won't this take away from their ability to race? And I would say no, because it's going to limit what they're going to have to do externally. Like the week of, maybe they'll do an interview or two, but all that is going to be coming out of their camp is a before interview and after interview that's created and turned into the video of that race. And then it's just going to be the same amount of work as having to do the media circuit, from like free trail to single track to free outside. Let's talk about that. Free trail, free outside. I started free outside in 2015. So we're a little bit bigger, a little better free outside. I mean, we're not just trails, we're the whole outside. So take that, Dylan Bowman. But anyways, I think there just is so much room for brands to invest in this side of it, and especially seeing the independent content that takes off, and how Aravaipa does it and is able to push things out into the world really well, that there are a lot of lessons to be learned there, and especially in knowing that kind of the rates and the cost of putting this type of content out there versus the desire and the hunger for this type of content for people watching, especially YouTube, but even short form content on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. I think brands are just really missing the boat. And the main reason they're missing the boat is because they're struggling with, should we have influencers or pro athletes on our team? And I think the answer is both. And there needs to be a lot more integration, because athletes need to better learn how to influence and help drive sales and promote the products they actually like. And influencers, I think, need to maybe showcase and put out correct content all the time. So no shade at anyone, but I do think some of the things you see about workouts and what people are doing, if they're an influencer, may not be the best for everyone, but what influencers are good at is getting people off the couch and into products, into races, on the streets, motivated. So I just think this is a pretty interesting thing that's going to continue to progress, but I don't know why more brands aren't investing and pushing athletes to create their own brands. Even Red Bull, I believe, funded and pushed Dylan Bowman to create what became Free Trail. So it obviously works, and it can be great for the athlete and the brand. And I don't know any examples where this hasn't worked. Even if an athlete fails, I think the story of a failure carries as much weight as the story of a success. It doesn't go down in the history books, but it becomes way more relatable. And that's where people grow to have a favorite athlete. When you see someone suffer, you relate to them, you feel what they're feeling, and then you want them to succeed. It's human nature to want that success story. So I think overall, it's all about trust, and we can create more trust on the influencer side and help athletes put out information, products, thoughts, opinions, reviews, and all that good stuff on what people should trust. All right, that was my short episode on the influencer versus pro runner debate, because I think we have a lot of room to grow. I hope some people that actually make decisions listen to this podcast, because I just think we can do way better, and we should know the pros in the sport a lot better. Like Jim Walmsley loves cars and trucks and working on them. How do we not know that? Why isn't that out there? I think that's the brand's fault. We can't expect someone to be great at everything. He can't be great at running and great at storytelling. So we need help in the decision to jump in and share things like that. It doesn't have to be Jim. It doesn't have to be Courtney, but anyone in between. I think that's where we need to head with this. Speaking of brands, this podcast is brought to you by Garage Grown Gear. So I'm getting most of my stuff for the Appalachian Trail from that website. I mean, there's everything you can need, from headlamps to battery banks to ultralight tarps to foam sleeping pads. If you camp the night before races, you probably want like a more comfortable sleeping setup. You can buy that at Garage Grown Gear. So check them out. CS Coffee, csinstant.coffee. It's premium freeze-dried coffee, great for the backcountry, great for the morning of your race. It's actually quality. It's pretty good. And then John G, my OG, they approached me. I was already running in their shorts, so it was a pretty easy decision to say, I believe now 3 years ago. So John G, JANJI.com. And oh yeah, we have a discount code. It's free outside. Use at John G, and you get some percent off. Go over there, check it out, and let me know what percent off you get, because I don't remember, but I think it's a good amount. Check it out. I love their shorts. Their pants are great. The sun hoodies, premium. I don't know if they're in stock. They're also dropping and launching bags. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I did. So check them out, johnj.com. Thanks for listening, guys. Please like, subscribe, 5 stars, follow me on Substack. And if you want to support the show, patreon.com/freeoutside. All right, that is everything I got. You can buy my book if you want. It's also called Free Outside. Stay elite, my friends.